All right. Whew. So now what we're up to is we need to factor it out. Factor this binomial. So ladies and gentlemen, remember what we're talking about when I say factoring a number, and that's the best thing I like to say. When I say factoring a number, what we're going to do is we're going to break it down into our two factors. And then we need to think about what are two factors. Well, our factor is a number that evenly divides into our number. So if I think about what are two factors of 6, besides obviously 6 and 1, that we can divide into it. Well, if I want to factor 6, I can factor 6 into 3 times 2. Now, how did I figure out? So when I say factoring 6, what I'm doing is I'm writing the number 6 as a product of its two factors. Okay? That's factoring. You're writing it as a product of two factors. So the way that I got 3 and 2 is, first you need to determine what number goes into your number. Well, I know 3 is a factor of 6. So what I do to find the other factor is I take 6 divided by 3, and that gives me my answer, which is 2. So then I write my two factors, 3 and 2, as a product. So factoring is going to give you the exact same answers. So mathematically, these are equivalent. 6 is equal to 3 times 2. However, we've written them differently, and that's the whole reason of factoring. So what I'm going to do is I need to determine what these have in common. A 9a cubed d squared minus 6a d cubed. We need to figure out what do they have in common. So there's a couple ways you guys can look at this, and if you get stuck, the best way to do this, Nicolette, is to just factor each term. So let's factor 9 squared. So what are some factors that make up 9? If I was going to write it as kind of my prime, I could rewrite that as 3 times 3. So if I was to factor the number 9, I could factor it as not 3 times 3, right? If I was going to write it into its prime factors. Then I'm going to take a cubed, and let's factor that. Can I break down a cubed? Can that be divided into by other numbers? And yeah, you can factor a cubed into a times a times a. Right? A times a times a equals a cubed. Right? Then I can factor out now d to d times d minus 6. We already practiced factoring that, which can be 3 times 2. Times a, and then d times d. Times d, thank you. So now what I need to do, ladies and gentlemen, is take a look at this huge expression. So I went from here to here, and I just wrote all the factors out. Now what I need to do, just like we did with 6, is say what goes into 6? What goes into this and goes into that? What is it they share? So we look at this and we just say, all right, let's start with the numbers. What number do they share? What number? Anybody? 3. 1 3 or 2 3s? 1. Just 1, right? This has 2 of them, but this only has 1. So that means only one factor is going to be, so my one factor they share is 3. Then what else do they share? An A. How many A's? 1, because this has 3, but that has 1, so they can only share one of them. How many D's? 2. 2, right? So I could rewrite that as d squared. So if I said one factor of 6 is 3, how did we get the other factor? What do we do? What can we do?
Divided by
if 3 is my one factor, if I divide 6 divided by 3, that's going to give me my other factor. So here's my one factor, and notice it's in multiplication. So it's 3ad squared times my other factor. So how do I figure out what this other factor is? Divide it by 3a times d times d. I'm just going to write it out. Watch out, I'm setting it here. 3a times d. So what I'm doing is I'm going to divide each of these terms by the factor I determined, which was 3ad squared. Okay? 3ad squared divides into both of them. So the last thing we need to remember is when you have a number divided by itself, it equals 1. Right? And 1 times anything, 1 times a is going to equal a, or 1 times d equals d. So what happens here? When I have a 3 divided by 3, that equals 1. Do I need to write 1 times all this stuff? No. A's cancel out. My d's start to cancel out. And I'm only left with 3 times a, which is now going to be in my resulting factor. 3a times a would be 3a squared. Okay? Then we look at the next one. Cancel out my 3's, cancel out my a's, cancel out the d's, and I'm left with just 2 times d. Minus 2d. Now, I look at my problem. Have I written it as a product of the two factors? Remember, factors, a number that evenly divides into it. Does 3ag squared evenly divide into this? Yes. We proved it right here by canceling it out. And then its result is, we'll learn later, it also goes into it, but the result is the other factor. You write those as a product, and now you've just factored product. Okay?